It's ironic that in 2026, I would set out to review 2 games, both of which I failed to complete in 2025. One being Avowed, which I stopped playing because it was terrible. You can see my 2026 review for my updated opinion. And the other was Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon. I honestly don't know why I stopped playing. We're going to explore that just for a little bit. My initial bounce off from Tainted Grail didn't have much to do with the game itself, but rather my mindset. You see, many reviews at the time loved to compare TGFA to Skyrim. And look, I get it, I do. But I also believe it's a truly unjust comparison that gave players a terribly false impression of what to expect, particularly casual gamers. And with all due respect to the Elder Scrolls series, challenging combat is not something that normally comes to mind when I think of Skyrim. So if you went into Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon, as I did in 2025, expecting a darker themed Bethesda experience, then like me, you were in for a rude awakening. But you know what? I'm glad I walked away a year ago, because if I hadn't, I doubt I'd feel compelled to return in 2026. Push through those opening hours as I've done in the lead up to its 1-year anniversary, and you'll find a game that wants the player to thrive. And yes, I know that's a bold statement to make in an impressions video, but that's just how strongly I feel about Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon, a game developed by 50 people with a budget that would barely cover a month's worth of salaries for most AAA studios. Right now, after nearly 10 hours, I have this incredible urge to 100% Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon as my own way of paying tribute to the development team behind 2025's other indie darling. Let's talk about combat. If I use the terminology Scrolls-like, that should fairly evenly sum up the experience, at least in terms of systems. You take the highly flexible combat mechanics of the Elder Scrolls series, add in a dodge mechanic and enemies that hit hard, and voila, you have TGFA. It's not really breaking any ground, but what sets Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon above the rest is just how flexible the buildcraft really is. You can equip up to 4 different weapon loadouts, running the full gamut of sword and shield, dual wielding, 2 hand weapons, spells, bows, and wands, or mix and match like I did. Funny enough, growing up, I distinctly remember a deep power fantasy revolving around dual-wielding swords, particularly in Knights of the Old Republic 2. I just had to be a grey Jedi with dual lightsabers. But as I've grown older, not wiser, but definitely older, that penchant for dual-wielding morphed into playing as a spell sword or battle mage. And that's exactly what I'm going for here, a sword in one hand and a spell in the other. I have to admit though, combat is clunky. Despite some positively fluid performance, combat is full of stops and starts. It's janky, but in the best ways possible. Just having access to a multitude of weapons at your disposal means very little if the skill tree isn't an active participant. Luckily, the amount of FOMO-inducing options you have can be both naturally overwhelming and thrilling. With my battle mage, I've decided to progress into a crit-heavy build, relying on spell damage to thin the bulk of the enemies out before falling back on my sword when things get a little bit dicey. One particular skill I really enjoy is Eldritch Depreciation, where I gain more spell damage the lower my reserve of mana. So by summoning a few friends prior to battle, my mana is permanently reduced until my summons die anyway. With my mana pool brought down by 2/3, my spells gain a 100% damage boost. But naturally, I have to be careful. Mana and stamina management are a core component baked into the mechanics of combat, so there is always a trade-off. It's this ability to play the game as intended and have a blast creating an OP character that gives this true sense of freedom. It's one that's increasingly rare, particularly among AAA studios, where they always seem to funnel the player down in a way that they want, not in a way that makes the most sense and the most fun for players. Modern Ubisoft titles are the perfect example. And I know it's low-hanging fruit, but it's cliche for a reason. They force the player to engage with the most unrealized and unfulfilling systems to artificially roadblock you, so you might just think about purchasing an add-on pack or game booster. Those games always result in burnout, see Valhalla or Odyssey. Grind for the sake of player retention. Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon wants you to enjoy yourself, to experience its challenges and overcome them, breaking the game if you need to, in a far more accessible manner than your average Souls-like. But even the most well thought out combat system could fall apart at the seams if progression is stalled by unbalanced experience rewards. I'm happy to say that, at least so far, I find myself leveling up at a very consistent pace. Each time I level up, I gain another attribute point and a skill point. Thankfully, you're also given potions of origins which allow you to respec your character, further promoting experimentation and individuality. On top of all that, the more you use a particular skill like one-handed weapons or magic, you gain proficiency in that skill, which contributes to your overall character level. Look, all this poetic waxworking is one thing, but even better games with better buildcraft can be drawn down if the story is lackluster. So far, I have to be honest, I'm intrigued. I'm not sold, I'm curious. Although I'm sure I can see where this narrative is headed, at least the general direction anyway. You awaken in a cell, and it's really hard not to draw Oblivion comparisons, but here we go. We go through a nice little character dialogue background tree with the guard, which sets our character up with its starting class, but as I've mentioned, buildcraft is free-flowing, this doesn't lock you in. We're then rescued by a man hell-bent on stopping the resurrection of King Arthur, the latest resurrection anyway, only for the player character to have a piece of said king's soul trapped inside our head. You think sharing a body with a man potentially responsible for the entire backstory of the game would offer us some insight into what's going on, but alas, he has amnesia, just like every great AAA game out there. As it turns out, Camelot is really a silly place, and they're hell-bent on bringing back the old Roman soldier to protect the island from weirdness, a magic plague that creeps over the land at night, bringing about the deadliest creatures in the game and disfiguring ordinary people. The stronger enemies reside in the weirdness, but it's well worth taking the risk and exploring. At night, enemies will drop rarer items that need to be identified back at our campfire, which requires weird plasm to identify, something only available during the night. Weird plasm also enables you to boost your campfire's abilities, transforming it into a fast travel point or restoring your special ability granted to you by sharing a body with King Arthur. Trust me when I say that this game is pretty dark in both the literal sense, some of the dungeons are downright impossible to see in, and in a more descriptive terminology when talking about the tone and the themes. Visually, the horror aspects are everywhere, but there's also this subtlety, this bleakness to the characters that's hard to quantify, but equally hard to ignore. And then all of a sudden, you're hit with a Monty Python reference, or you're helping a guard create a seagull helmet because he's waging a one-man war against the gulls. You might hear that last sentence and immediately think of a crash test dummy being slammed against the wall of tonal whiplash. But no, I found myself so enthralled in what I was doing, it didn't register that tonally it felt like a slightly different game. In fact, looking over my notes, it felt like I was meeting a real person in a fictional world, not a string of ones and zeros. And it's this balance, at least from what I've experienced so far, that helps those horrific moments stand out. As Stephen King once said, you can't have horror without hope. But look, this could all change after all. I'm only in the first region of the game, a game that can take upwards of 70 hours to 100%. And I really do need to stress that Tainted Grail, particularly early on, is challenging. You will die a lot, from enemy mobs stumbling into high-level battles, fast travel points permanently surrounded by monsters. Just like every good Souls-like inspired game, those enemies respawn each time you rest, and you have to watch out for bears. Those bears are the worst, just like every true RPG. I try my hardest not to bloat out my impressions, I know failing, with fluffy, flowery fanfare. But I really do have to gush over just how gorgeous this game can be. There were so many moments, too many to count, where I was genuinely stunned by the visuals on display. And I know it's a faux pas to gawk over just how good a game looks, but a 50-person studio built this game. 50 people developed this from the ground up and crafted a world that looks as good, if not better, than Avowed, for example. Sure, get close enough to some of the assets and the textures look stretched or warped, but when we see the morning mist rolling through the mountains or a ruined castle standing amongst the fog like a decaying sentinel, you can't help but be impressed. This world gives the player a deep impression that there's something hidden, a force that's coveting the island but beckoning the player to seek out its mysteries. And is this not one of the reasons we play RPGs to begin with? Not the surface level attribute of playing a good or evil character, but finding ourselves in a world that's waiting for us to explore. It's why I can easily look past the uncanny valleyness to the character models, the awkward movements, or the unrefined structure to combat encounters, because we're given this theme park to uncover with just enough breadcrumbs to guide us through. Admittedly, a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the performance, which is fucking rock solid, let me tell you. It's impressive, really impressive. There are a few other systems you can actually engage with. Fishing is one, for example. There's an achievement locked behind catching every fish in the game. There's also a crafting system which brings all the usual accoutrements like chopping wood or collecting metal ores, and there's mounts, although I haven't unlocked a mount just yet. As with all my impressions, I want to finish up by highlighting a few of my concerns. For starters, I'm roughly 10 or so hours in, with quite a few side quests left, and from all reports, Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon should take me about 40 hours to complete without attempting a 100%. And considering there's 3 zones and I've already seen a third of the content, not including DLC, this leaves me with this tremendous feeling that the game is indeed incredibly front-loaded. And if that feeling doesn't shift, then I have to be honest, it could be one of the game's biggest structural problems. Being brutally honest with you, I do remember many reviews mentioning this at launch, so hopefully it's been amended. Not sure how they do that, mind you. TGFA does have a crafting system, but unfortunately, you can't break down gear for resources. A staple of many crafting systems. I mean, shit, even Avowed let you do that. And despite this not being a huge game-breaking issue, it was still a sour note in an otherwise, so far, incredible score. And lastly, a small nitpick, vendors don't update their stock. There's no new items after you say reach a level milestone. They just happen to restock what you've probably already bought. And that's it. That's my impressions for Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon. Hopefully I should get the review out in about 5 weeks or so. But let me know if you've played TGFA, what you thought about it, and until the next video, take care of yourselves. I'll see you later. Bye. Felheim, muss Felheim, il ist Oberfell.